You may know Charles Barkley as the analyst on Inside the NBA who makes fun of his co-host first and talks about basketball second if there's any time left. But what if I told you that despite being the height of a point guard and sneaking entire pizzas into his hotel room, Charles Barkley was one of the most feared big men to ever lace them up? Back at a time when Jordan was flying through the air and Shaq was putting grown men on their ass, Charles Barkley was throwing people through windows, spitting on little girls in the crowd, and saying whatever the hell was on his mind despite the pushbacks or consequences he would face. You may think Charles Barkley is one of the best power forwards ever, or you may think of him as a loudmouthed asshole. Only thing for certain is no matter your opinion, he doesn't give a fuck. It's time to get in on the action this football season with the best daily fantasy game on the market. I know we're all about basketball over here, but I'm sure that more than a few of you are ready to take over the fantasy game. And with Prize Picks, that just got a whole lot easier. If you're a fan of the channel, you can help support us today by soaking up some guaranteed cash instantly. Yeah, you heard that right. Sign up today and get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. It's guaranteed. I've been playing Prize Picks recently and I have no idea why I waited so long. This week on Prize Picks, I'm looking at the football season longboard and selecting JJ over 86 yards and Josh Allen over 250. Prize Picks is the best place to get real money sports action. Join over 5 million users and sign up today. Download the app and use code SWISHCOUNTY to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. If you're looking to start off your fantasy season with a bang while helping out the channel in a major way, make sure you download the app today and use code SWISHCOUNTY to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks. Run your game. Growing up in rural Alabama, Charles' personality as a child was nearly unrecognizable to what he's known as now. As a quiet kid, his life certainly had no shortage of hardships, as following his parents' divorce, his dad would abandon the family, and after remarrying, his stepfather would pass away when Chuck was in the 5th grade. In a way, despite being an elementary schooler, Barkley was the man of the house and a father figure to his older brothers, before sadly, one of his younger brothers would pass away in infancy, but there was no time for him to catch his breath. Barkley's mom would work 2 jobs to put bologna and cheese sandwiches on the table, and Charles would be at home cleaning the house and making sure it was in livable condition. Quite the task for a 12-year-old, but the way he stayed level-headed came in the form of basketball. As a freshman standing at 5'10" and looking more like a Redditor than a basketball player at 220 pounds with a pretty sweet afro, despite being as dedicated as they come as his sole hobby and passion, as you can imagine, a flabby 5'10" point guard was not exactly doing the job. And after playing JV as a sophomore and rarely touching the varsity floor as a junior, it was hard to imagine a college floor in his future, let alone the NBA. Despite his clear physical disadvantage, Barkley really did everything he could to turn his visions of playing basketball for a living and taking his family out of poverty to a reality. Charles would spend his days jumping over a steel fence as a form of jump training and polish up his skill set enough to survive as an undersized player. Due to hard work first and a lucky and timely growth spurt second, Barkley shot up to 6'4" for his senior season, where now with the size of a high school big man, he could really put in some work. At 19 points and 18 rebounds, the only way you could describe his game was dominant. Playing small-town teams while having the strength, skill, and sneaky athleticism, Barkley was the talk of Leeds, Alabama. But to come from nothing is next to impossible without a little luck in the meantime. If it wasn't for the high school dominance of future Alabama star Bobby Lee Hurts, we would probably never even come to know Charles Barkley, as he'd probably be working in a butcher shop somewhere. After an out-of-nowhere success of a senior season, the world outside of the small-town Alabama was yet to really know of the kid, with a college recruitment scene as dry as the sand. It wasn't until the state semifinals his senior season, just a few games before the end of the conclusion of his high school career, that a 26-point outing on Hurts' head would get the attention of an Auburn scout that had never heard the name Charles Barkley in his life. But after making the call to head coach Sonny Smith that he had just seen a fat guy who could play like the wind, Barkley was officially a Tiger. It didn't take long for Charles Barkley to flip the world of college basketball upside down. After 5 games of coming off the bench, this no-name kid was not only starting, but dominating, and grabbing the world's attention in the meantime.
Makes you pay. Oh, there goes Barkley. Look out for this one. Here comes Barkley. Oh, That is a thunder slam, they call it.
Barkley was instantly everywhere. The quiet kid from Leeds, Alabama was the most marketable figure in college basketball due to his abnormal look and even more abnormal ability. And with the new world of fame that just a few years ago seemed like an impossible outcome, Barkley was transformed into a whole different man. With all eyes on him, the quiet kid was forced to speak up. And what the world seemed to notice that the quiet kid in the back of class was the funniest dude in the room. Barkley was loved by fans, classmates, and teammates alike. And Barkley loved every minute of collegiate stardom, from autographs to photo shoots to frat parties. But with this new fun-loving Barkley left behind what got him there in the first place. The kid who wanted nothing more than to give every ounce of him to the game that he loved seemed to be just a memory. Barkley had made it to the top of the college game and settled there. I mean, he was putting up some fantastic numbers, Auburn was seeing higher ratings than they've ever seen, and the whole world was in love with the kid, well, except for one man. Head coach Sonny Smith seemed to be the one person that Barkley couldn't charm. Due to Barkley's coasting in practice and lack of drive to improve on the floor, Smith and Barkley would completely collide practice after practice after practice. In a war that truly had no innocent parties involved, Barkley was a lazy son of a gun that was only there to show up at game time and spent the rest of his time having fun and letting his weight get completely out of control. In fact, his food problem got so bad that whenever he would call the local Domino's and say his name, they would instantly fly over to his dorm room with 2 large pizzas the way that he liked them. On the other side of the coin, Smith would respond to his overweight big man by calling him a fat POS and punching him at practice. So either way you look at it, the fit was a mismatch. It wasn't until after Barkley decided to leave Auburn after his sophomore season that Smith and Charles would sit down and the war would come to a ceasefire. Smith expressed to Barkley the concerns with his attitude, lack of focus, and general complacency with the game. He was right. Barkley expressed to Smith that he wanted to be treated like a person instead of a piece of meat. He was right also. The two would work out their differences that really brought the best out of Auburn basketball altogether. Charles put up the best stats in the SEC on a dominating 64% from the field, while Coach Smith would coach Auburn to their first NCAA tournament in history, before a disappointing upset in the first round to conclude Barkley's junior year. Following such a dominating run, Chuck would be invited to try out for the 1984 USA team. Although information on the tryout is limited, by most accounts, Barkley's tryout runs were shockingly dominant for a fat college kid who struggled to work hard in practice playing against the best pros in the world. But likely due to the controversies stemming from Barkley's antics, Chuck would be cut from the roster that he really didn't care to play for anyways. Not only did Chuck get his wish of a summer free from basketball, but also inflated his NBA stock in a great way, declaring for the 1984 NBA draft and hanging up his Auburn jersey after one hell of a run. As the all-time leader in field goal percentage for the Tigers, Barkley's college career was a strange foreshadow for what was to come, as in 3 years Barkley had seen total domination, but he had also seen heart-snatching defeats on the brightest stage. Barkley had seen the entire world fall in love with him, but he also had built bitter rivals that wanted nothing more than to beat him to a pulp. The foundation for Charles Barkley's NBA career was poured, but the story that was built on it was truly something crazier than anyone could have imagined. As draft night came around, Charles would be front and center to hear his name called 5th overall to the Philadelphia 76ers, topping off what was probably the greatest top 5 in history, following Hakeem Olajuwon and Michael Jeffrey Jordan. With a draft this loaded, 1984 essentially surged the NBA with new talent catapulting into a new era, and also surged the 76ers' aging roster who had reached gold just 2 years prior. It really seemed like a dream scenario on paper. Chuck would share the block with Moses Malone, both of which were rather unselfish yet dominant players who could space the floor a little bit, and Julius Erving, although old, could still compete and help them elevate this team to championship levels while mentoring their up-and-coming star. And similar can be said for the ultra-underrated Bobby Jones. This seemed to be even more of a dream scenario as Charles and Malone hit it off to a crazy extent. I mean, literally to the point where Barkley was referring to Moses as his dad, which is pretty damn weird, but whatever floats your boat, Chuck. Regardless, the expectable outcome when it comes to Charles Barkley essentially means jack shit. Barkley had came into the draft intentionally fat as piss after discovering that under contract restrictions, the Sixers could only offer him about $75,000 per year. Barkley made it his mission to get so fat that the 76ers had no option but to pass on him.
I had like 6 pancakes, bacon, wash it down with a vanilla shake. Then we went to lunch. I think I had like 4 or 5 pieces of Kentucky Fried Chicken, some mashed potatoes, some coleslaw. Then we went to dinner someplace. I had like a T-bone steak, had a baked potato. And then next day did the exact same thing.
Despite ballooning up over 300 pounds, Barkley of course would still land in the city of brotherly love, and although they made room to pay him more of his worth, the weight was still jiggling every time down the floor. Barkley was no doubt a success throughout his rookie season, averaging 14 and 8.6 on sky-high efficiency, but in the words of his coach, he was a complete headache in practice, and in the words of his teammate, he was completely untapped potential. Really, we may never have seen Barkley come to his full form in Philadelphia if it wasn't for the top-of-the-line leadership of Moses Malone. And this is the advantage that very few players get. At the rare occasion top players end up on top teams. And learning under one of the hardest working players in the world, Chuck began to get his weight under control and learned how to condition himself for NBA basketball. Barkley would help bring the roster back to life after a down year in 1984. Now rolling through the East, Charles would get his first taste of the playoffs early, stomping into the conference finals. Unfortunately, the Sixers would not see their return to the NBA's biggest stage because Larry Bird was the baddest man in basketball at the time. But this year certainly was a great start in the right direction. Charles clearly had learned a lot under Moses, as when the following year came, this guy was a whole new beast. Now averaging 20 points and 13 boards with 4 assists, 2.2 steals, and 1.6 blocks, Chuck was filling up the stat sheet in the most unique way possible. As an athletic beast of a big man, Charles used his natural knack for tracking down rebounds as well as his Kardashian ass to box out players and become the best rebounder in the world. And after grabbing every defensive board, Charles was the only big man who could put the ball on the floor and take it in transition himself, bulldozing every player he sees in the meantime on his way to a dunk that looked weirdly athletic for a fat guy with his body type. Really, this guy was no doubt one of the most unique and entertaining players that the game had ever seen, and boy was it effective. Charles has seen a massive upswing in production this year, making one of the best twin tower lineups the game's ever seen, even if one of the towers was more of a garden-style apartment. With Charles finishing 6th in MVP voting this year, and Moses finishing 10th, the Sixers had one of the best rosters in the NBA, which made it a bit disappointing when their season would end at the hand of the Milwaukee Bucks in 7 games in just the second round of the playoffs. The Bucks were a very good and extremely well-rounded team, don't get me wrong, but with 2 top 10 players to be conservative, Maurice Cheeks, who was anything but Cheeks, and really began contributing as the playoffs went on as a consistent number 3 or 4, and the veteran leadership of not only Moses and Irving, but guys like Jones and McAdoo as well. I mean, this team just screams championship winner. Unfortunately, after an injury to Moses, this would not be the case in the 1986 season. And while likely being maybe a piece away from a championship, if that, the Sixers would make a splash that still reigns as one of the worst trades in NBA history. Barkley would wake up to a call from a news reporter in the offseason that would tell him that the Sixers had moved the number 1 pick in the 1986 draft for Roy Hinson, to which Charles said, "Phil, this is no time to be joking. Nobody's that stupid to trade the number 1 pick." Roy, of course, would go on to have one of the most mediocre seasons possible given his position, and after taking a shower, Barkley would call back the journalist to receive word of a trade that made the Hinson deal seem like the steal of a lifetime. The Sixers, without asking Barkley, had traded Moses Malone in a move that altered the franchise forever. While being really on the bubble of NBA gold, the Sixers gave up on a move to relieve themselves of aging talent in pursuit of younger players that could grow around Chuck while he buckled into the driver's seat. In reality though, they gave up the player who really got the best out of Chuck, on top of being one of the greatest players of all time, who still had quite a few 25-10 seasons left in the tank. Yeah, the Sixers really blew it beyond belief with this one. On a lighter note, the goal of opening the floor for Barkley was a success, I guess, as Barkley would see jumps to 23 points and 14.6 rebounds on 60% shooting from the field. It's fair to say sticking around the mid-20s as the rebounding champ while averaging about 1.5 steals and 1.5 blocks, Barkley was about as versatile as they come. Hell, despite shooting 28%, he still hoisted a couple 3 balls a game. But as a rebounder, a talented defender, and a very elite post player, A tremendous transition player and underrated facilitator, Barkley up to that point was one of the pioneers that brought the NBA to new heights in the 1980s.
Gage getting the opportunity to shoot, not showing much confidence. Speaking of confidence, how about that move?
Chuck would go on to dominate on an individual level over the next 3 seasons, even including a 28-point season in '88 while the team was severely lacking in talent, failing to make the playoffs at 36 and 46. The Sixers' strengths really began and ended with Charles Barkley, with the number 2 guy being Hershey Hawkins, mixed with really limited talent around him. Despite this, at full strength, Charles was able to will the Sixers to 53 wins in a second-round matchup against the Chicago Bulls. But even with Barkley, who at this point was already being acknowledged as one of the best power forwards of all time, if you didn't have an all-time lineup, you were not competing with Chicago, getting stomped out 4-1. This was really the best Sixers team of the Barkley era too, seeing another early defeat from the Bulls in the next season, and again, failing to make the playoffs in 1992. During this time, the frustration was seriously building in Charlotte. Barkley at one point would go out and voice his opinion on the roster, letting the media know that this team sucked, and when given the chance to clarify, he doubled down to let them know, "No, we are a bad team." Barkley's anger didn't just result in some mean words, as the NBA's most deserving punching bag, Bill Laimbeer, would come to learn. After receiving a pregame note from Barkley that stated, "Dear Bill, fuck you. Love, Charles." Barkley proceeded to put the big dude on his ass the first chance he got. It wasn't just the players who got some hands, as in his account, he can't even remember how many times he was arrested for hitting fans.
I've been arrested, I think, 4 times for hitting fans.
I was wrong.
4 times, I think. I was wrong.
No, 6.
I think it's either 6 or 4.
Whatever it is, I think
Chuck was certainly one of the most controversial figures in the world, let alone sports at the time. But whether you loved him or hated him, you can't deny that this guy kept you watching while he freely spoke his mind.
That was a really, really boring game. I apologize for playing like crap, but I couldn't get motivated, I ain't gonna lie.
Well, we don't have a lot of plays. Only plays we got is get the ball to me somehow.
Whether you agreed with some of his antics, laughed at his jokes, or disagreed with him and wanted him out of the league, one thing's for sure. You couldn't stop talking about him. The one incident that Chuck still looks back on with regret, however, came the night of March 26th, 1991. After being called racial slurs by a man in the crowd, as Hershey looked at him to see him sucking his cheeks in, Barkley let the fattest loogie you've ever seen fly at the man. Only problem was, he missed and clocked an 8-year-old girl. After the spitting incident, the world finally seemed to snap, and Barkley accepted it. After a suspension and fine, Barkley was vilified on every media outlet in the world, but after doing his best to make it up to her, giving her tickets and remaining in contact to this day, Barkley would be featured in one of the most recognizable Nike commercials in the most Chuck way possible.
I am not a role model. I'm not paid to be a role model. I am paid to wreak havoc on the basketball court. Parents should be role models. Just because I dunk a basketball doesn't mean I should raise your kids.
Embodying his image for what it was, Barkley would move on with the remainder of his career as the guy half the world hated and half the world adored. But as you could imagine, not a damn person had a chance of changing what he was, because he was about as authentic as they come. Chuck would move on with his career in equally dramatic fashion, requesting a ticket out of Philly after failing to make the playoffs in 1992. And even with the luggage he dragged with him, the Barkley sweepstake was a hot commodity that any team would kill for. In the midst of an offseason muddied by a court case for a fight outside of a bar in Milwaukee, Barkley would have himself one hell of a day, freeing himself of the shackles on his back.
It said not guilty, and I ran out the courtroom and I got a phone call from my agent. He's been traded. I said, where am I going? He's going to Phoenix. And I was racing to the airport to catch a plane. And I remember, I said, I don't care how much it costs. Free drinks for everybody on the plane.
In a move landing Jeff Hornacek, Andrew Lang, and Tim Perry, the Sixers successfully fumbled the entire shifting of the Dr. J era by creating a train wreck of a franchise that, even with the likes of Allen Iverson and Joel Embiid attempting to revive it up to this point, with trades this colossally bad, it's safe to say that the Sixers might have earned themselves a franchise curse. With Lang and Perry playing short and unmemorable careers in Philly, and the centric player in the trade in Jeff Hornacek not establishing himself in the public eye until landing in Utah the following season, this trade was a colossal failure, but surely set Charles up for success. Before landing onto a much better team, months after the trade, and Charles Barkley was suiting up for an even better team. The most famous Olympic basketball team of all time was assembled in the 1992 offseason, and alongside Michael Jordan, it became pretty clear at this stage of time, Barkley was the second best option on this team, and possibly the second best player in the world. Having gotten pounded by the Bulls time after time, Barkley was once again second behind the man who repeatedly robbed him of the gold. What was strange about this situation is that as two of the most unique personalities of all time, the two actually became very close friends. Jordan certainly wasn't one to make friends with his opponents, but as a basketball psychopath behind closed doors, looking in the eyes of Charles Barkley was like looking in a mirror. Only difference was that Barkley wouldn't hide who he was to sell a few more sneakers. The two would bond over not only their extreme personalities, but competitiveness on and off the floor. With very well documented gambling problems, Barkley would share the same habit as Jordan, losing a reported $30 million in gambling over his lifetime. Jordan would also be known to flash his rings to remind Barkley of who was running the league at this time. The constant battle not only motivated Chuck to push for the promised land when arriving in Phoenix, but also to take down his buddy in the process. To say that Barkley was better equipped for a championship run during this time would be an understatement. Opposed to an offense centric on fast breaks by your short fat forward, post touches surrounded by nobodies, and hoisting threes with Chuck's 20% jump shot, the Suns had way more firepower on this roster. Point guard Kevin Johnson was a hyper-athletic guard, and at 8 assists a game could feed Chuck better than anyone other than Domino's Pizza. 3-and-D guy Dan Marley was big as a sneaky good scorer, being second in points as a pretty damn athletic and all-around good talent, and the rest of the roster was just filled out with fantastic mix of young guys like Cedric Ceballos and Richard Dumas, as well as quality vets like Danny Ainge and Tom Chambers, under very reputable leadership in Paul Westphal. Although on paper, many of the teams we see today may have way more talent, you rarely see teams mesh the way that these guys did. The Phoenix Suns, ironically, were just a well-crafted and calculated roster, which although there was bit to be desired defensively, created one of the best offenses in the last 30 years. Barkley really went out and dominated at 25-12 this season, while the Suns didn't miss a beat at a very impressive 62-20 in their first year together. Chuck would be awarded his first and only MVP trophy for his play this season. Now with a set of new faces who he couldn't shift the blame on, the pressure was on Chuck's shoulders to live up to the standards he set on himself in the 1993 playoffs. And that he sure as hell did. Taking out the Lakers and Spurs in the first and second rounds, this set the stage for a moving matchup to conclude the Western Conference showdown. Although a pretty damn good team with a pretty damn good four, the Supersonics and Sean Kemp were not too damn bad either. Extending the series to 7, Chuck really danced the line on another disappointing playoff finish. But Game 7 in the series was one of the moments that made 90s basketball so damn special. At 44 points and 24 rebounds on 60% shooting, Charles Barkley had himself a game. This was pure individual dominance.
Barkley.
Backdoor on Sean Kemp, and Barkley now with 16.
Barkley for Phoenix. Barkley draws Kemp close, and Perkins, and his first shot of the second half. And Chambers. Barkley, he hasn't had a three, does now. 100-84. Barkley again, foul on Kemp, and the confrontation of the game's top stars, Kemp and Barkley. Symbolically, Kemp fouls out, and Barkley goes to score more.
In one of the best closeout games in NBA history, this performance certainly did a lot to build Sir Charles' playoff resume that he really had yet to have the chance to create. But with the job yet to be finished, I think you can guess who is already waiting for them in the Eastern Conference. Charles may have made a cute little run to his first final series while putting up a nice little game on the Seattle Supersonics, but Michael Jordan was looking for his third ring and wiped his ass with the Sonics franchise. And with fresh legs, having lost just 2 games in the postseason and way more finals experience, the Bulls jumped up to a demanding 2-0 lead in the series, taking both games on the road in Phoenix. But in desperation, the Suns made a statement in Game 3 to turn this thing into a series. With their backs against the wall in Chi-Town, Barkley would put up a loud 24-19 to will them back into this thing. and keep them above water in the meantime. But despite a 32-point triple-double in Game 4, the Bulls and Suns were officially in a back-and-forth slugfest. The Bulls would go on to take Game 4, while Barkley once again kept his Suns alive in Game 5, and in the winner-go-home Game 6, this is really where we saw 90s basketball at its finest. Defense up the wahoo, the game turned into a grit-and-grind war up until the last seconds, when one lapse in judgment blew the game and the series wide open. After a risky pass went up 2, Charles chose to gamble on a steal on Scottie Pippen, who found his dump-off guy when the help came. But in an instance, with a touch pass out on the wing and John Paxson wide open, John was shooting the ball to decide the series.
Paxson going for the win. Here's Paxson for 3. Paxson. Yes! Hits the 3. Yes! The Bulls take.
Oh man, this one had to sting. Coming closer than any of Jordan's finals matchups ever did, while losing for the 3rd straight playoff appearance to the same damn team, while in your heart knowing that this was likely going to be the best chance that you ever get. Out of everyone who was ever given the short end of the stick, never to succeed when Jordan ruled the land, Barkley may have gotten slammed the hardest, because had he been the man behind the dream team, and had he came to Phoenix and won this thing on his first damn try, Charles for damn sure wouldn't be getting bullied by Shaq all of these years later. Despite totaling crazy averages of 27, 13, and 5.5 with 1.2 steals, Charles just couldn't get it done, largely because Michael Jordan may have had the best final series of all time. At 41, 8.5, and 6 with nearly 2 steals and a block, I don't know what to say, it's Michael Jordan, man. This for Barkley really was just supposed to be the year, there's no other way to say it. After a decade in the league at 30 years old, Barkley began to see the effects of running around with a beer belly and eating ice cream before games. With injuries popping up more frequently and production subtly dropping, Barkley would consider retirement after each of the next 3 seasons, while Hakeem Olajuwon and the Rockets took over the league in Jordan's absence. Back-to-back losses to Olajuwon before the finals brought clouds over the Suns' parade. Although there were moments of brilliance with averages near 23 a game, Barkley was now missing 20 games a season after being a bit of an Iron Man, and seeing his efficiency fall south of 50%, which really showed how his dominance fell as his athleticism declined. After putting together a nice little run when opportunity arose, the Houston Rockets looked to extend their championship window by adding the man who they spent the last couple of years bullying, acquiring Barkley in a trade in 1996. As his career was clearly in a twilight, Barkley was probably about 70% as effective as he once was in his first year in Houston, but he was still 100% of the asshole. With instances like dumping a beer on a Scottsdale woman for ripping up his autograph, Charles would end up seeing 4 separate charges, all of which would be dropped, involving punches flying within his first year in Houston. But Charles' antics would reach a few highs, one in which he claims wasn't high enough after he threw a 5-foot, 110-pound man through a first-story window after he hit him with a cup of ice. Chuck's only regret, of course, after the incident was that the building was only 1 story. The antics reached the point where the league threatened to kick him out if he didn't just get a damn bodyguard. Despite becoming one of the greatest ever, Chuck still roamed the streets by himself like he worked in sales. Despite what the world was telling you, when you dig deeper into Charles's off-the-court antics, although crazy, really weren't what you think. Yes, he bit the bullet for chucking a guy through the window, but why did it not come out for months that the guy threw a cup of ice at his head? Yes, Charles was a bit crazy for some of the violent acts he's caused, but there's thousands of stories of people who have met Chuck and don't have a negative word to say about him.
I meet 50 people a day. So I probably met, 1 million people. And 1 million have been great. 5 or 6 have been really bad. I wouldn't trade that for the world. I don't mind those little 6 or 7 negative things because I meet the most incredible people.
When it comes to the antics of Charles Barkley, they certainly are never ending. But in any case, the guy who says he can do no wrong and the guy who calls him a villain are both usually incorrect. And Chuck was just Chuck. Barkley would chase the ring for the remainder of his career. But after his first season in Houston and his last All-Star Game appearance, his production would steeply decline. The Rockets would actually come very close to return to the finals, but in a fitting fashion, the Utah Jazz would deny their bid with some timely late-game heroics. Following Chuck's first year in Houston, this is really where we saw him let himself go pretty hard, but not before one very strange beef with Scottie Pippen. See, for years, Scottie and Barkley were always acquaintances, in one way or another. Of course, they collided in the playoffs time after time, played on the dream team together, and always seemed to have a healthy level of respect for one another. After years of praying for a number 2 guy on his level, after the 1998 season, Barkley's wish would finally come true, even if he was certainly a shell of his former self. But with Hakeem Olajuwon, Charles Barkley, and Scottie Pippen all sharing the floor together, this made one stacked Houston Rockets lineup. Jordan would retire, leaving the Bulls dynasty essentially done. And as Scottie was pretty old at the time as well, throwing their aging star a bag was not part of the rebuild. So Scottie signed with Houston, whose timeline was better aligned, landing a massive 5-year, $67 million deal. However, reality was that at this time, Houston couldn't afford it either. To make room for the new guy, Barkley took a massive pay cut at just $1 million in an attempt to make one last push to the promised land. But although it seemed to be all fine and dandy with 3 main co-stars on the tail end of their legendary careers looking for one more shot at the chip, even Michael Jordan warned Scottie of trying to win with Charles Barkley on your team. Not to say that Charles didn't want to win, but comparative to guys like Jordan who left no option but to win, Charles wasn't really that guy. He knew it was just a game. He brought his family out of poverty and had fun in the meantime. Some guys just didn't like that. In a fitting manner, Chuck would show up late for training camp due to spending the weekend golfing with Jordan. Pippen certainly wasn't having this, and as the guy with the championship experience that few can compare it to, he sat down with Barkley and told him the drive he would need if he wants to finish with some gold on his finger. What seemed to be a constant with Chuck is that if you had something to say to him, he would listen, and if he was wrong, he would change. And a few months into the season, it seemed to be on the right track. The Rockets were winning, Chuck was getting back into shape, and this team was visibly having fun on the floor together. Well, kinda. As time went on, Scottie did not fit into his new role. Comparative to his point forward job in Chicago, Houston was quite a bit more off-ball lurking, cutting, and spotting up, which you can expect playing alongside 2 post-scoring, ball-dominant big guys. Rudy Tomjanovich would try to involve Pippen in the offensive scheme, but as Pippen was also on the decline at this point, the squad of grumpy old guys slowly started falling apart. Things got even worse as when an already fed up Pippen grew tired of Barkley's antics following Pippen's DUI arrest, Barkley of course had to make fun of him in front of the whole team, calling him Scotty, the role model Pippen, over the Plains PA. And on a team he didn't want to play for with a guy he grew sick of, Scotty was officially fed up with Houston. The Rockets would fall in just the first round of the playoffs this season, and as the two would blame each other for the loss, Scotty would be asking for a ticket to LA to play for the Lakers instead. As Scotty would demand a trade, Charles wouldn't hear a peep out of Scotty's mouth and confronted him on the issue. The insults started rolling in. Charles demanded an apology, calling Scotty a big baby.
I wouldn't get Charles Barkley an apology at gunpoint, so he could never expect an apology from me. If anything, he owed me an apology for coming and play with his sorry fat butt.
Well, he said he would never apologize.
Not even at gunpoint.
But as you know, I always carry a gun with me. So there is a chance. There's a chance. I'm gonna go to my truck and get my gun and see. And so if I get arrested for murder, y'all know he didn't apologize. If we ever
As this very strange and kind of fitting saga would end, Charles would suffer injuries that effectively ended his career. But after months of riding the bench, Charles chose to go out for one more last game on his own terms.
Richie Norris going to the basket, lays it up, misses. Barkley with a rebound.
As Charles Barkley would retire from the game, he of course never went too far. And in what would never happen in today's times, they actually were willing to give this loudmouth a microphone on television. Whereas we all know the controversies never stopped. With dramas like a Dewey arrest while speeding home to get oral from a prostitute, Charles' commentary career has certainly been something. And as his commentary career has officially outlasted his playing days, his talent on the floor seems to be a bit forgotten. We all know the stain on his legacy that failing to win a chip did to him, but in reality, Charles is one that just never got his chance. Had Barkley not have to face up against the best of all time year after year, while playing his best years on a sorry franchise, maybe things would be different. And maybe if he focused on the game to the levels of the Birds and the Magics, stayed on the treadmill, and stayed out of trouble, he'd be right there with them. There were certainly a lot of wrongs that if Chuck would have righted, would have left a legacy as one of the 5 or 10 best players to ever pick up a ball. But had he done it their way, he wouldn't be the one and only Charles Barkley.
Folks on the call-in shows have been very vocal in their criticism of you for doing this. You really think I give a flying what the people on the radio call say? Thank you.